Good morning. We are starting a new chapter today, chapter 25, A Nation with Challenges. So let's get this going here. We're going to talk about the era from 1973 to 1980. I'm going to skip through some of this. In this first section, we're going to be looking at Nixon's decline in popularity during his second term of office and the highlights of the Ford administration. So we're talking here about the embattled presidency, and these notes will be on Google Classroom, so you can get them from there if you would rather do that, even before watching your video. Okay, so let's talk about Watergate. We hear about this. Hopefully everybody has heard about this before, with the possible exception of our foreign exchange students. But Watergate was a huge scandal in American history. What happened was, in the middle of the presidential election series, the series of events that lead up to our election of a U.S. president, in June of 1972, 5 burglars were arrested for breaking into the Watergate building. That's the name of a building where the Democratic National Committee was headquartered. It was just a simple burglary at first. That's all that it looked like. But then, as the story developed later on, as the story continued to work through, well, who was responsible for the burglary and who are these people and why did they do it, working a case as policemen do, it came out that these 5 burglars were members of the Republican. They were doing it on purpose. Obviously, you don't break into a place on accident, but that this had been ordered higher up in the government. Okay, information begins to emerge about the people at higher and higher levels of government knowing about this, sanctioning this event, and even plotting in the plot of it. And then so some false letters start circling around sent by aides accusing different people within the government of being part of it. These scandals during the Nixon years included far more than just this break-in at the Watergate office complex. The cover-up that followed was extensive and prolonged. Other crimes, such as burglarizing Daniel Ellsberg's office, and we'll talk about that one in just a minute, and others also occurred. Among those implicated in criminal activity was the Attorney General of the United States. His name was John Mitchell. About 24 Nixon aides were sentenced to prison for their part in crimes committed during this period. Now, you probably don't remember who Ellsberg is, but he was in our previous chapter. He was the guy who sent the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. The Pentagon Papers revealing secrets about how the war in Vietnam was really going. So they were trying to discredit him. There were several dismissals, people who lost their jobs or who were either forced to resign or were fired. What were their motives? The motives behind this, while a lot of times they're motivated by money or greed, this one, the Watergate affair and all of the surrounding things, was primarily motivated by political power. Okay, so then we continue on, Nixon has won his second term of office. We're settling all the Watergate affairs. Who knows about what? When do they know? All of this kind of thing. And then it came out, there was a little bit of a scandal that, not a little bit, it was a big one, that the vice president, Spiro Agnew, not connected to the Watergate robbery, but that he, when he was governor of Maryland and when he was vice president, had taken bribes. And when all of that was found out, he pleaded nolo contendere. What contender? What does that mean? It means that he's not guilty, but he's not innocent. Okay? It basically, when you plead nolo contendere, it means you're not pleading guilty, but you're not pleading innocent. You're not guilty, you're not innocent. Okay? All right, so he pleaded that he received a fine and probation, and of course, he is forced to resign his position because he's now guilty of a crime. And this is the first time that a vice president has resigned since John C. Calhoun did it in 1832. And that was basically he resigned to run for public office. So all of this is gathering up on Nixon, and he does not look good right now. Nobody likes the fact that all of these people around him are crooks or guilty of crimes. So it's just making him look worse. So the 25th Amendment had been passed just a few years earlier, and that had allowed the president, at this point allows the president to choose a new vice president. And he nominated Gerald Ford for the position, and he was easily confirmed. Gerald Ford was the Senate or House Minority Leader. I think it's House Minority Leader. He was a Republican, of course, because Nixon was a Republican. But he had never been elected by a vote of the entire nation. He served the state of Ohio, I believe it was. All right. So then it comes out shortly after Ford is confirmed easily in both the House and the Senate. Not a problem. He's now going to serve as vice president. And then in the middle of 1973, a White House aide reveals that Nixon had installed a secret recording system in the White House, and that Nixon had recorded every conversation that ever took place in the Oval Office. And suddenly everybody starts, well, we want to hear the tapes. We want to hear what's going on. We want to know what happened. We want to know what Nixon knew and when he knew it. And he refused to release the tapes, saying that it was a matter of national security, that he, for all these reasons, the separation of powers is at stake. He claimed all of these reasons why he couldn't release all the tapes. And in the meantime, his approval rating is in the toilet. It is just really bad. He tried releasing some of the tapes, not the actual tapes themselves, but he tried releasing transcripts of the tapes. Kind of sound familiar? We've had some of this with Trump. Heavily redacted so that it wouldn't reveal state secrets and stuff like that. That didn't work. People were not satisfied. So eventually, this is becoming a real national trauma. Okay, people everywhere are upset with Nixon. They're upset with the press. They're everything. So in July of 1974, this case makes it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rules that Nixon must release all of the tapes. He can release them to Congress or whatever, but he's got to release them all. And as they started listening to these tapes, they proved the existence of a cover-up. Not necessarily that Nixon knew about Watergate when it happened, but that he at least tried to cover it up afterwards. And impeachment is looking very likely. Nixon would have been impeached. He would have been removed from office. So in August of 1974, Nixon resigns, never having admitted that he was guilty of any crime. So now Ford is president, and for at least the first few months, they're going to, kind of cut him some slack and give him a little bit of good, and that's the initial period of goodwill where they're not going to try to ramrod things around him and all of that. But then he does something that he thought was a good idea. He granted Nixon a full pardon. He thought that that would help America put Watergate behind us and start moving forward as a nation, but it only made people mad, and it made him face a wide array of criticism. Okay. He had some other obstacles, some issues, some personal issues really, that he's going to face that are going to make his presidency particularly difficult. First of all, he had never been elected in an election of the whole nation. And everybody knows that. So they are all reluctant to listen to him and to accept him as a full-fledged president. So that's his first obstacle. The second one is he has a perception, he was perceived as being clumsy. And I say that because um, he was actually a football player. He had played football for the University of Michigan, had been one of their star centers. He was athletic. He'd actually been a model in earlier in his career. Um, but then he has a series of public accidents where he falls up the stairs of the presidential jet. He hits a spectator when he's playing golf. He's just all of this is lending to a perception that he is clumsy, which is not going to go over well with the American people. And the third thing is he's dealing with a hostile Congress. Both houses of Congress are controlled by the Democrats, and he's a Republican. So they are trying, their agenda and his agenda don't mesh, as we see in our current president and the House of Representatives, but he's fighting it with everything he's got. He actually vetoes 66 bills in his term as president, and about, I think it was 16 that got overturned. 12 of them got overturned by Congress. His vetoes got overturned. So that's a very high percentage as far as presidents go. So he really had a rough time being president. And then comes the final defeat in Southeast Asia. Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos all fall to communism. That, along with a sluggish economy, our economy is still in the toilet. Gas prices are horrendous. Everything is not economically stable here in the United States. And his reputation as president is completely ruined. And that does it for Nixon and Ford. I hope you've listened intently and you are ready for your quiz.